Hello and welcome to Forgotten Voices Part 2. Yesterday we left it at the outbreak of the war, 1939. You can catch it there if you need to catch up. My favourite bits was the little lad who saw a cow for the very first time, and the guy on the boat who didn't realise he was actually being sent to France for good. Thought it was a training exercise. As always, you know it. Stick him there. Right, without further ado, because we're pressed for time. 1939, the Phoney War. War had been declared. Christmas came as troops bided their time in Britain and France. There was a deep feeling of unease, but only one thing was certain. Sooner or later in 1940, the war would begin in earnest. Ronald McGill. We've heard from Ronald a few times. Evacuee from Vauxhall, London to Reading. We were in a very grand house, but I can't remember walking over it. I think we must have been told to stay in our sort of area, or the garden, and that's the only parts I can remember of the house, except for sitting down for meals. I think we were there, tucked away. Somebody was looking after us, and they were giving us a good home. We were away from anything that was going to happen, and as the weeks went by, nothing was going to happen. Perhaps they're going to feel we've taken them in for nothing. A very real feeling. Our parents visited us after 3 weeks, and they came by bus. The lady looking after us took us into Reading, and we waited by the cinema. I remember my mum and dad getting off the bus. They took us round the town to a cafe and brought us sweets and made a fuss. He's trying to rhyme again. Then they were straight back out on the bus after a couple of hours. I can't remember my mum and dad coming back to the house. I don't know why, but they didn't come back to see our billet, which is unusual when you think about it. Dad had to go back to work, so we were just collected again, and they went back to London. But we said we weren't happy then. The week after Mum had gone back, I sent a card, and on the bottom of it, I'd written, "Dear Mum, we want to come home." Within a week, they were down and took us back. We were really only away for 7 weeks at the most. They must have seen the difference in us, and I don't know why. We were well fed, and we were being looked after, but it didn't work. Mum's thoughts of whatever was going to happen to her and Dad would include us. The people didn't demur. They just accepted it. I think, quite frankly, they were glad to see the back of us. Nancy Bazin, civilian in Devon, working as a supply teacher. We have very strong memories of the first evacuee children coming to the West Country. The obvious place to send a great number of the London Borough children was to the West Country, and all of the families were being asked to take in their rooms 1, 2, according to the number of rooms they had. Children were being billeted, and I was involved with friends who were billeting officers. I have a very keen recollection of these little things and their gas mask box, and the little suitcases in their hands, looking very, in many cases, dejected. Very small children in particular, and I've taken them to homes with people speaking in, to their way, a very curious accent. The Devonian is a kind-hearted person, but on the other hand, not very used to the Cockney child. They were an odd mixture, and in most cases they settled in very well. I was to see the next side when I was actually teaching in mixed classrooms. They settled down remarkably well, particularly in the completely rural areas, because there the farm children had a great plus in that they knew everything about the animals and the livestock and the general countryside, and there was a lot of interest in the town children, for the town children. Though they felt lost, they were pleased to be surrounded by a lot of animals, and children who could teach them so much. I think it was a good blending. During that period, known as the Phoney War, there was a lot of feeling that it was an unnecessary exercise, and that they really might as well be at home with their parents, who were missing them very much. And of course, there was no doubt that I think the families in Devon were probably quite relieved to have a period without them, so went back. Joan Reed, schoolgirl evacuee in Ongar. I couldn't understand why we'd been sent. Nothing had happened, because there didn't seem to be any war. It seemed very premature. My mother was at home. Everything was perfect at home. Doris Scott, civilian from Canning Town, East London, evacuated to Wallingford, Berkshire. I really did fear invasion because we knew that they'd just marched into Poland, just like that. A Polish refugee was in our billet, and she used to get into hysterics about what she had gone through. We had to calm her down. I felt, God, if that happens here, what would it be like? Lilias Walker, schoolgirl evacuated from Hull to Scarborough. I thought it was a great joke. You get into these school stories and you think, oh, it's just like a boarding school. We were evacuated to a hotel, the Astoria, which overlooked the Italian gardens at Scarborough. There were 2 girls to a bed and we were 6 to a bedroom. It was a very cold winter and everything froze up. And there was no hot water in this place. One of my first memories is of the first meal that we had at the hotel. For dessert, we got bread and butter pudding, but we didn't like the lettuce and the meat that was floating about in it. We went to school in the morning and did nothing in the afternoon. It was just a beautiful summer. We just went swimming and things like that. Sergeant Raymond Trevas, Drum Major, 1st Battalion, Coldstream Guards. God bless the Guards. There was a football match between us and a French army unit, and they had a French band there, and we had my corps of drums, and at the end we were both together on the football field, and the French bandmaster conducted the British national anthem, and then I was called upon to conduct the French national anthem. When it had finished, they turned about and saluted the top brass, and I saw the brigadier coming out from the saluting box with the French general. I had a nasty idea what was going to happen. And it did, of course. When he approached, I saluted him, and he kissed me on both cheeks. A huge great roar came from the Coldstreams in the stands. Somebody sent a report to London, which was put in the Brigade magazine, which I never saw. It took a bit of living down once we got back. I was in the sergeant's mess, and the sergeant major came in and said, "Do I have to kiss you, drum major?" I said, "No, you certainly do not," or words of that effect. Captain Derek Boileau Lang, the adjutant, 4th Battalion, Cameron Highlanders. There was never any question of us anticipating and preempting a German attack. We were always on the defensive. Apart from anything else, the Maginot Line itself was designed, wrongly as it turned out, to be a bastion of defence which nobody would get through. In fact, the cry was, "On ne passera pas." They had done nothing really to prepare their defences. There's a good example of this down in the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line defences consisted of 4 lines, but only one was the concrete line, with all the built-in heavy armament. There was 1 defence line in front of it and 2 behind, known as the ligne de contact. The one in front of the ligne de recul, and this one immediately behind. And behind that was the ligne d'arrêt, the line of stopping. When our General Victor Fortune, went down to the ligne d'arrêt, a number of French poilus, how do you say that, came along with picks and shovels, started to dig fences around him. He asked, "What are they doing? What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, we were told that a British general was coming down to look at the defences, and we thought we'd better dig them and make a start." That really presents the picture of those 3 lines, other than the Maginot. Captain Paul Hawkins, Royal Norfolk Regiment. Our duties were in fact to guard ammunition dumps, which were laid out along the sides of the network of roads about 7 or 8 miles from Arras, and also to try and dig fresh emplacements by the side of the road, to put in shells and ammunition. I always remember that time of digging out one particular piece by the side of the road, which would only come away in large chunks because the frost was in the ground to a couple of feet deep. We found the skeleton of a First World War German soldier, whose jackboots were still reasonably intact, and a Canadian soldier whose identification disc was still there. They were taken away and buried elsewhere. Sergeant William Harding, Royal Artillery, attached to the Queen's Victoria Rifles. We had dugouts only. We dug our own holes in the ground, covered them over with sandbags and corrugated iron, but there was no provision for water. Nobody ever dreamed that water was going to come down like it did. because it flooded down. We dug channels in the ground, but it went to terribly gooey mud, just like a lot of porridge. Your boots got twice the size and squelched as you walked along. You ended up with wet feet. Nothing was dry. Nothing at all was dry because it just rained day in, day out. Eventually, the officers arranged a rum issue at night to keep the cold out. The meals were bully beef stew, day in, day out. That's all they had to offer. Sometimes they fried it in flour and water and made fritters. Other times we had sandwiches of bully beef, but bully beef it was. We got to the situation where officers were buying food out of their own pockets. Things got so bad that the cook sergeant asked for 6 volunteers, and I went. We went in a 3-ton lorry without the officers knowing, and raided farms round and stealing everything we could lay our hands on. Cabbages, anything. There seemed to be a complete lack of interest at that time from the people at home about the BEF. I think with the long drag from September onwards, with nothing really happening, their interest had died. And I think they got the impression we were all having a marvellous time, living it up. Gay Paris sort of thing. We were short of water, so the habit caught on of shaving in the last drop of tea in the mug. We just existed that way. Eventually it got so bad, just before Christmas we were moved. It was just untenable. Men were going into hospital and things were showing themselves in a very bad way with health generally. Flight Lieutenant, RAF Brothers, 32 Squadron. What did I do? Flight Lieutenant Peter Brothers, not RAF Brothers. 32 Squadron, RAF. I was sent to Uxbridge first, for ground training, getting kitted out and so on. At Uxbridge, there was this splendid First World War pilot, Ira Taffy Jones, who stuttered terribly. One day he stood up and said, "There's going to be a bloody war, and you chaps are going to be in it. I'll give you one piece of advice. When you first get into the combat, you will be fucking frightened. Never forget that, chap. In the other cockpit, it is twice as fucking frightening as you are." I reckon he saved my life with that piece of advice. In my first combat over France, I suddenly thought, my God, the chap in that other cockpit must be having hysterics, and shot him down. But I give all credit to Taffy. The first hint of war came into my life with the Munich crisis, when I began to think, yes, this is deadly serious. Then came the so-called Phoney war, convoy patrols and constant scrambles, but you never saw the enemy. Gunther Rahl, yes, Gunther Rahl. Fighter ace, very, very good. Luftwaffe fighter pilot. The Versailles Treaty had ruined the German economy, and there was much business, particularly against the French. We had to pay and pay and pay, and there were restrictions everywhere. I heard Hitler on the radio. He said, "From now on, we are fighting back. As a soldier and as a pilot, we are all feeling, come on now, we are ready." I mean, there was a great anxiety about what was coming, but that did not mean you were not willing to show that we are capable pilots. You wanted to prove that you had mastered what you had learned. And master it he did. Josephine Pierce, in Paris, en route to join Ambulance Unit 282 in Alsace. When I eventually got to Sarreguemines, where the unit was, I was inundated with questions from the nurses. They were asking me, why was Paris behaving itself? And at first I thought, what do they mean? I realised what they meant because we'd been at war for 3 months, and they were behaving as though there was no war. They were doing nothing to protect the people, nothing to protect themselves. The Battle of River Plate. In August, before war was declared, Hitler put the pocket battleships. What is a pocket battleship? You tell us. This is a hidden joke on the We Have Ways podcast, but I still don't know. Hitler put the pocket battleships Graf Spee and the Deutschland to sea, before the Allies could blockade them in their home ports. When war was declared, he issued a directive for German naval vessels above and below the water to attack Allied shipping. In the course of 2.5 months, Graf Spee sank 9 British ships, including the Doric Star, before heading for South American waters. On 13th of December, 3 British cruisers, one of the 8 hunting groups formed to protect Allied shipping, spotted Graf Spee off Montevideo. Although the German vessel managed to inflict heavy damage on HMS Exeter, she sustained such serious damage herself that she took refuge in the mouth of River Plate, where, on Hitler's orders, Captain Lansdorff scuttled her to avoid the disgrace of being sunk by the enemy. At last, there was positive news in the naval war, a much-needed boost for British morale. Good on the Navy. Here we go. Peter Brothers. We just heard from him. Not RAF Brothers, Peter Brothers. Lieutenant Commander Richard Jennings, gunnery officer aboard HMS Exeter. This is a big one. On the 8th of December, the Commodore told us to patrol around the Falkland Islands in case the Germans were planning a comeback to mark the anniversary of the Battle of the Falkland Islands in 1914. But nothing happened, so we headed north and joined the Commodore in the Plate estuary on the evening of the 12th of December. We did some steam tactics on arrival. Commodore Harwood sent for the captains of the Exeter, Ajax and Achilles to inform them of his intentions. Should we encounter the pocket battleship, no one else knew what tactics he was going to pursue. I had the middle watch that night of 12th of December. When I was relieved, I went aft, shaved, and decided against turning in as dawn action stations was due at 0440. After some more steam tactics, we reverted to 3rd degree of readiness. I got into my pyjamas, arranged for a call by the sentry just outside my cabin door, and turned in, only to be called 10 minutes later. I hustled up to my action station in the direct control tower. As I was crossing the compass platform, the captain hailed me, not with the usual sort of rigmarole of enemy in sight, bearing, etc., but with, "There's the fucking sheer! Open fire at her!" Throughout the battle, the crew of the Exeter thought they were fighting the Admiral von Scheer, but the name of the enemy ship was, of course, the Graf Spee. So the fight was on. It was about 0612. In the DC tower, I was in telephonic touch with the transmitting station, which, in turn, was in touch with all main armaments quarters. I ordered, "Open fire!" The range was then about 20,000 yards, and Graf Spee was as large as life on the horizon. Our 8-inch guns could hit any target up to 30,000 yards away. At 0624, while loading for the 9th broadside, B turret received a direct hit, knocking it out of action. Not only that, but fragments peppered the compass platform, leaving only the captain and 2 others standing. The captain, with his eyes full of grit, decided to fight the ship from aft conning position. We were in the DC tower, less than 15 feet above the compass platform. We were quite unaware of all this upset. Another round entered the fore superstructure, ran along the deck of the remote control WT office, passed out through my office, and burst over the starboard AA guns, starting fires in the area of the ready-use ammunition lockers. In the meantime, a turret, when loading for our 32nd broadside, was put out of action by a direct hit on the right gun. God blimey, this is a battle. Imagine that, a rocket passing through your office. Well, a round, not a rocket. In perhaps the last hit that came in by the petty officer's mess and burst into the chief petty officer's locker flat. That caused the most worry. The flat was above 3 magazines, and a diesel generator was put out of action. The transmitting station was rendered useless, as visibility was nil due to white powder used for insulating the space around the transmitting station. Breathing was also difficult. The crew was ordered out to join up with the damaged control parties. I left the DC tower, finding to my surprise that the compass platform had been abandoned. I went aft to the after control, and with the control officer decided to put Y turret into local control, with me standing on the house roof to help with the spotting. While talking to the after control officer, I failed to notice we had altered course a few degrees, and that the guns of Y turret were only a few feet away. When the gun spoke, I remember looking down and seeing that my legs were still there. After perhaps 2 salvos in local control, Y turret lost all power due to flooding, and the flooding in the ship grew worse. At this stage, Harwood told us to drop out of action and head for Port Stanley. There was nothing we could do now. For now, the Graf Spee was far too far away to ram. Excuse me. Able seaman Reginald Fogwill, aboard HMS Exeter. Although the Exeter was now on only 2 guns, we steamed into action with the guns firing on the foremost bearing. The control of the tower was taken on by the gunnery officer, Richard Jennings. With utter disregard for his own safety, he stood on top of the turret, shouting directions down into the front of the gun. By now, we were in sinking condition and slowly listing to port. Where's that side port? When it became apparent to the Commodore that we were in dangerous condition, we were ordered to withdraw from the action and make our way to Port Stanley. But we weren't in any great hurry to retreat. The captain had mentioned to the ship's doctor that he intended to ram the Graf Spee, so we were all ready to rig up the Lewis guns, but in the end we didn't have to. Nobody felt particularly relieved that we were out of action. The general feeling was that we hadn't done enough. It kind of made you bloodthirsty. You felt so isolated from the real activity because it's shells from the ship which are doing the job, not you. I never experienced fear, not even in retrospect. We stopped for lunch and everybody was given a tot of rum. It was my first because I was only 18 and underage. The shock of what we had been through sank into us in the form of hunger. At that time there was no means of getting a meal, and the only thing we could get our hands on was raw cabbage. And we had this and enjoyed it. Then we set to work to clear away the damage. Some of this work was ghastly, because as the debris was cleared, the great number of dead and wounded was brought to light. I was put on lookout on the wings of the bridge, on the flag deck. It was pretty grim because there were still some bodies around. The shell which had passed from port to starboard had sliced right through the deck and chopped off the legs of all the telegraphers who were lined up in the bench. God blimey. They were all killed instantly. There were over 60 killed and over 120 wounded. During the afternoon, our fallen comrades were buried at sea with full naval honours. I know that every survivor thinks with pride of those who were lost and will never forget them. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're on to 1940. If you like this, please like and subscribe. I can never remember. That's subscribe. This one's the next video. No, the video before. Either way, thank you for watching. See you again next time.